Welcome to the Funeral Channel Network podcast. Usually, when we talk about planning a funeral, there's this overwhelming, almost unspoken expectation of absolute permanence.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, we approach death with this rigid architecture. You buy the heavy, hermetically sealed metal casket.
Right, the classic model.
Yeah, and you pour a reinforced concrete vault deep into the earth, and then the death care industry basically points to this perfectly flat, artificially manicured lawn and says, there it is, protected, defying the elements forever.
Yeah, it's an approach completely designed to arrest time, to just freeze a biological process right in its tracks.
Right.
And well, for a lot of people, that static preservation provides a deeply ingrained psychological comfort. We have this human instinct to want to seal things away from the chaos of the natural world.
I want to build a fortress, basically.
Exactly. A fortress around our loved ones, even after they're gone.
But then you step into the world of green burials, which is what we're looking at today, and suddenly that fortress is it's completely dismantled.
Completely.
The rigid architecture is gone. We're looking at a final resting landscape that, isn't a flat lawn. It's wild. It's this dynamic, shifting ecosystem.
It really is.
And if you're tuning in for another deep dive with us today, you are about to experience an absolute paradigm shift in how we handle our final footprint on this earth.
It's a profound inversion of modern death care. Like, if you were to visualize the backdrop for this conversation, you need to strip away the somber, velvet-lined funeral parlor.
Right. Get that image out of your head.
Yeah. Picture a serene, sunlit conservation forest. You have wind moving through the canopy, native ferns growing thick on the forest floor.
Wow.
Just a completely natural ecosystem that is actively thriving. And that theme of natural return is, well, it's the heartbeat of the source material we're unpacking today.
For sure. So today's source is this highly detailed, comprehensive guide titled Essential Questions for Planning Sustainable Green Burials.
It's a great guide.
It really is. And our mission for you, the listener, whether you're, proactively pre-planning your own arrangements or whether you've suddenly been thrust into handling things for a loved one.
Which happens a lot.
Yeah, it does. Or even if you're just endlessly fascinated by the sociology and biology of how human beings process the end of life. We want to arm you with an exact blueprint.
To give you the real tools.
Exactly. We want to give you the critical and sometimes really uncomfortable questions you need to navigate this rapidly growing movement.
Because it is growing fast.
So fast. And as I was reading through this guide, it struck me that a traditional burial is essentially like maintaining a massive artificial golf course.
That is such a good way to put it.
Right. It requires constant chemical intervention, endless mowing, artificial leveling of the ground, whereas a green burial, on the other hand, is like a self-sustaining nature reserve.
Right.
It simply belongs to the earth.
The golf course versus the nature reserve is honestly a highly accurate way to frame the physical reality of these spaces.
Yeah.
And the overarching thesis of our source material is that achieving that nature reserve ending is not a passive process.
No, not at all.
It's not just a matter of, walking into a funeral home, flipping through a glossy catalog, and just pointing to a slightly different type of wood or box.
Like, I'll take the green one.
Right, exactly. It is an intentional, active, and sometimes fiercely bureaucratic departure from the norm. It requires you to aggressively interrogate the professionals you're hiring.
Which brings up a massive assumption we really need to shatter right out of the gate here.
Let's do it.
You wouldn't hire a corporate architect who spends their life building steel and glass skyscrapers to design a completely off-grid, passive solar earthship in the desert.
Of course not. They wouldn't know where to start.
Exactly. They wouldn't know the materials. They wouldn't know the specific engineering. So why on earth would we assume that a conventional funeral director automatically knows how to execute a flawless, ecologically sound green burial?
You absolutely cannot assume that. I mean, the modern death care industry is heavily standardized around chemical preservation and concrete vaults.
It's an assembly line.
It is. And the text is incredibly explicit that families must treat the funeral director as a gatekeeper who needs to be thoroughly vetted.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, the first hurdle is asking if they have actual practical experience with green burials. Like, have they coordinated with certified green cemeteries before?
Right.
Do they actually understand the highly nuanced environmental regulations that govern an unembalmed body?
I hear that, but practically speaking, let's remember the emotional context of this transaction for a second.
Right. It's intense.
You are a grieving family member. You're likely exhausted, sleep-deprived, highly vulnerable.
Absolutely.
How do you, in that state, actually tell the difference between a funeral director who truly understands the ethos of this movement and one who is just, nodding along, giving you the corporate smile to secure a five-figure business contract?
That vulnerability is exactly why the source provides specific tactical questions. You don't just ask a broad, easily faked question like, do you do green burials?
Because they'll just say yes.
Exactly. You ask for their playbook. You ask for specific examples of past services they've managed.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. A truly knowledgeable director will shift their behavior immediately. They won't sit back and wait for you to drag the information out of them.
They'll just volunteer it.
Right. They will proactively explain the vast logistical differences between traditional and green options. They transition from being a salesperson, trying to upsell a package, to acting as an educator and an advocate.
So they should basically be mapping out the terrain for you.
Precisely.
And the first major terrain shift the text points out brings us straight into the chemistry of death care, the embalming process.
Yes, this is the big one.
Now, I always thought of traditional embalming as essentially hitting the pause button on nature. But reading the biology in our sources, it's a lot more aggressive than that.
Oh, it's much more aggressive.
It's not just a pause button. It's turning the body into a toxic fortress that actively repels the environment.
It is a literal chemical assault on the natural biology of decomposition. I mean, traditional embalming fluids are heavily reliant on formaldehyde, which is a known carcinogen.
It's toxic stuff.
Very. It's dangerous for the embalmers who inhaled it over decades of work. And once introduced into the earth, it is objectively destructive.
How does it actually work in the ground, though?
Well, formaldehyde works by cross-linking proteins in the cellular structure. It basically fixes the tissue so it cannot break down.
Wow.
But in doing so, it sterilizes the immediate environment. It kills off the necrobiome.
Wait, what's the necrobiome?
It's the natural bacteria within our own bodies that are supposed to initiate decomposition,
Yep.
and it damages the vital fungal networks in the soil that are trying to reclaim those nutrients.
So you're basically poisoning the very forest floor you're trying to return to.
Exactly.
That's wild. The source states families must explicitly demand chemical-free preservation methods. But here's where my skepticism kicks in a bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've been conditioned for a century to believe that an unembalmed body is a massive public health hazard.
Right.
If we strip away the chemical fortress, aren't we creating a biological risk, especially during transport or if there's like a delay in the burial?
That is actually one of the most pervasive myths in modern death care.
Really?
Yeah. It's born largely out of industry marketing rather than actual science.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The World Health Organization and the CDC have repeatedly stated that dead bodies, in and of themselves, do not cause epidemics or pose a significant public health risk after natural deaths.
No way. So the bacteria isn't dangerous.
Right. The bacteria involved in decomposition are not the bacteria that cause infectious human diseases. The true alternatives to formaldehyde are incredibly simple and effective.
Wish or what?
Refrigeration or the strategic use of dry ice. You simply keep the body cool to slow the biological clock naturally without introducing toxins.
So the questions for the director become purely logistical then. Like, how do you manage refrigeration? Or do you have the facilities to accommodate dry ice cooling?
Yes, exactly. And beyond the standard logistics, you really have to interrogate them on the edge cases.
What do you mean by edge cases?
Well, there are rare, highly specific circumstances, perhaps, involving international transport across certain borders, or highly specific, localized legal mandates.
Oh, where the law gets involved.
Right. Where some form of preservation might be legally forced upon the family. So families must ask for total transparency regarding contingency plans.
Like a backup plan.
Exactly. If a legal hurdle absolutely requires embalming, you need to ask, does this funeral home keep eco-friendly, formaldehyde-free alternatives on hand?
Oh, those exist.
They do. There are plant-based essential oil preservation fluids that provide temporary preservation without permanently poisoning the soil.
That's incredible.
And a forward-thinking director will already have those in their supply closet, just in case.
What that tells me is you need a director who isn't just selling a green best-case scenario, but has a real green contingency plan for when reality gets complicated.
Absolutely.
Now, if we successfully bypass the chemical preservation, we run headfirst into a massive structural change in how the funeral actually operates. the timeline.
Yes, the clock starts ticking very differently.
Because without those chemicals, the biological clock is ticking much faster. And the window for gathering and mourning fundamentally shifts.
It does. The luxury of a prolonged 2-week delay, waiting for distant relatives to book flights and arrive while the body remains on display in a perfectly preserved state that's just gone.
Right.
Green burials, by their biological nature, must occur much closer to the time of death.
That has to completely upend the emotional landscape for the family.
It completely shifts it.
Because in a traditional setting, you have this buffer period where you're dealing with caterers and flower arrangements. You're almost distracting yourself before the finality of the burial.
Right. It's a lot of busy work.
But here, you are forced into a much more immediate, raw time frame. You're in the absolute thick of the initial shock, and things just have to move.
It demands an intense presence from the mourners. And logistically, it's why the text hammers home the importance of asking about site availability and scheduling constraints on day one.
Because if you don't...
If you don't ask the cemetery how fast they can open a grave, you might find yourself in a nightmare scenario on day 3, trying to coordinate an unembalmed burial with a cemetery that, say, only does interments on alternate Thursdays.
Oh, that sounds incredibly stressful.
The friction between natural biology and cemetery scheduling can cause massive trauma if the director hasn't mapped it out in advance.
Okay, so the timeline is compressed, which means we need to immediately secure the vessel.
Yes.
What are we actually putting into the earth? The guide is unyielding on this. Biodegradable materials are absolutely mandatory.
Non-negotiable.
But again, the assumptions we bring from the traditional funeral world are misleading. Like, a lot of people might look at a standard wooden casket in a showroom and think, well, wood comes from trees are natural, therefore this is a green option.
Yeah, that's a very common misconception.
But the reality of manufacturing makes that entirely false.
Completely false.
Yeah.
The standard showroom wooden casket is a highly engineered product that actually resists the earth.
How so?
Well, first, it's often constructed with wood harvested from unsustainable sources. Then, it's heavily treated with synthetic polyurethane varnishes to give it that high-gloss shine.
Right, that shiny finish.
Yeah. And the interior is lined with synthetic fabrics like polyester, which is essentially plastic and will just sit in the soil for centuries.
Oh, wow.
And the entire structure is held together with heavy metal hinges, steel screws, and locking mechanisms. None of those materials belong in a conservation ecosystem.
They're essentially building a piece of heavy furniture to bury underground.
That's exactly what it is.
So a true green vessel has to be entirely porous to the ecosystem. We're talking untreated, unfinished wood,
Yes.
simple pine boxes held together with wooden dowels instead of metal screws.
Or woven wicker or bamboo.
Right. Or, stripping it back to the absolute most ancient human tradition, a simple, natural fiber shroud, like linen, cotton, or wool.
And you have to ask the director about the sourcing of these materials, too.
Like where they come from.
Exactly. Is the bamboo sustainably harvested? Is the wicker locally woven? Or is it being shipped across the globe?
Which would add a huge carbon footprint.
Right. Furthermore, you need to understand the decomposition timeline of the specific vessel you choose.
Does it vary a lot?
It does. A heavy, untreated oak box will still take decades to break down, whereas a linen shroud begins to integrate with the soil ecology almost immediately. The container's only job is to provide dignified transport and then completely get out of the way of the natural process.
And getting out of the way brings us to perhaps the most fascinating divergence between conventional and green cemeteries. The vault.
Oh, the vault. Yes.
Because in a conventional cemetery, you don't just put the casket in the dirt. You place it inside a massive reinforced concrete vault or a thick plastic grave liner. And for a long time, I just assumed this was to protect the casket from groundwater or something.
A lot of people think that.
But the truth is entirely about landscaping efficiency, isn't it?
It is entirely about the lawnmowers.
That is so crazy to me.
I know. But as a casket degrades, the earth above it naturally settles and sinks. In a conventional cemetery, which is designed to mimic a pristine, flat public park, sunken graves are a maintenance nightmare.
Because you can't mow over them.
Exactly. A heavy ride-on lawnmower cannot navigate a field of dipping, uneven soil. So the industry introduced the concrete vault to bear the weight of the earth, ensuring the lawn remains perfectly, artificially flat for eternity.
So it's an engineering solution for a landscaping problem.
That requires massive amounts of carbon-heavy concrete.
Now, green burials explicitly ban these vaults. They want the soil to have direct access to the body. But if we skip the vault, the physics of the earth still apply.
They certainly do.
The ground is going to sink. So how do green cemeteries manage the actual physical topography of the land when the earth starts settling?
This is a critical question families must ask when evaluating a cemetery because it requires a complete mental shift in how we view a resting place.
Right.
A certified conservation ground fully expects the earth to settle. It is proof that the ecosystem is working.
How does it look at first, though?
Initially, the grave is managed by mounding the displaced earth significantly over the site, but over the course of months and years, as the natural subsidence occurs, that mound slowly lowers.
And then what?
Eventually, it simply blends into the undulating, uneven topography of the natural forest floor or the wild meadow.
That is a beautiful but potentially jarring realization for a family.
It can be very jarring.
You have to stop viewing the cemetery as a static, frozen monument that will look exactly the same in 50 years. You have to embrace it as a dynamic, living ecosystem that breathes, shifts, and changes shape over time. The actual physical contours of your loved one's resting place will transform as they return to the earth.
It requires surrendering the illusion of control and understanding the specific regulations of the site is paramount.
Because different sites have different rules.
Yes, a pure conservation cemetery might allow the land to go completely wild, letting native brambles and saplings overtake the grave entirely.
Okay.
But a hybrid cemetery, which might have a traditional lawn section and a designated green section, well, they might have different aesthetic rules. The family must ask, what will this specific plot of land look like in 5 years? In 20 years? You must be prepared for the reality of the wilderness.
Which brings us to a massive logistical hurdle.
Which one?
Well, we have a biodegradable vessel, an accelerated timeline, and an acceptance of the wild earth. But getting an unembalmed body in an untreated pine box from the place of death to a pristine conservation forest requires navigating a modern municipal system that was entirely designed for the conventional chemical concrete funeral.
It really is a massive clash between an ancient natural practice and modern bureaucracy.
And the friction between nature and the state is unavoidable here.
Totally unavoidable.
And it begins with the physical journey itself, transportation.
Yes. Let's talk about the carbon footprint of the traditional final ride.
The heavy, customized Cadillac hearse. The long procession of idling cars stretching for a mile behind it.
Right. Moving a body cross-country or even just across a sprawling metropolis creates significant carbon emissions.
It creates this jarring irony where you're trying to execute a purely eco-friendly burial, but you're burning 50 gallons of diesel fuel just to get to the forest.
It is a blind spot for many families who are hyper-focused on the casket and the embalming.
That makes sense.
But the source material explicitly urges us to interrogate the transportation footprint. You must ask the director about eco-friendly alternatives.
Like what, hybrid hearses?
Yes. Can the transport vehicle be a hybrid or electric? Can the logistics be sourced hyper-locally to drastically reduce the travel miles involved?
My favorite alternative mentioned in the text is the return to the walking procession.
It's such a beautiful concept.
Imagine trading that fleet of gas-guzzling black limousines and the loud police sirens for a quiet, intentional walking procession.
Just walking together.
Yeah. The family and friends physically walking alongside the body, perhaps pulling it on a simple hand-drawn cart down a forest path to the burial site.
It's so grounding.
It completely strips away the industrial machinery. It changes the entire psychological vibe of the goodbye from a stressful traffic commute into a grounded, somber pilgrimage.
That physical act of walking grounds the mourners. It connects their bodies to the landscape before the burial even occurs. It enforces a slowness that counteracts the panic of grief.
Absolutely.
But, even if you walk the final mile, you cannot walk away from the red tape.
Right. There is this romanticized, almost outlaw idea that green burial means you can just carry your loved one out into the nearest national park, grab a shovel, and return them to the earth.
Which sounds poetic, but it's highly illegal.
Exactly. The legal reality is much stricter.
The state has a profound interest in knowing exactly where human remains are housed. Green burials do not bypass a single legal requirement.
You still need all the paperwork.
You still need a physician or coroner to issue a death certificate. You still need burial transit permits to move the body across county lines.
Right.
And most importantly, you have to comply with incredibly strict local zoning laws that dictate exactly what constitutes a legal cemetery.
So what is the family's responsibility here? Because I can't imagine trying to parse municipal zoning codes while dealing with the immediate aftermath of a death.
The family's responsibility is to ensure their chosen gatekeeper, the funeral director, is a master of this specific bureaucracy.
Back to the vetting process.
Exactly. You must actively ask, how do you manage the specialized transport permits for an unembalmed body?
Yeah.
Are you intimately familiar with the specific zoning restrictions of the conservation ground we have chosen?
You need them to handle the heavy lifting.
Right. A truly competent green funeral director operates like a shield. They absorb the bureaucratic chaos, handle the filings invisibly, and allow the family to focus purely on the emotional and ceremonial aspects of the journey.
But the director can't shield you from the weather.
Oh, nature always has the final say.
And this is where the contingency planning becomes critical, because we are relying on an outdoor natural environment, and nature is famously uncooperative.
To say the least.
What if there is a catastrophic weather event?
Huh.
What if it's January in a northern climate and the ground is frozen solid for 3 feet?
Or a torrential flood.
Right, a 100-year flood, and the site is literally underwater and physically cannot be opened.
Well, in a traditional funeral paradigm, extreme weather is just an inconvenience. You have an embalmed body safely stored, and you simply delay the burial for a week.
The machinery can wait.
Exactly. But in a green burial, without chemical preservation, a sudden blizzard is a biological ticking clock meeting a logistical brick wall.
So what is the backup plan? You have to ask the director what happens when the wild nature reserve acts wild.
Exactly. You must ask, what is the specific protocol if the burial site is inaccessible on the planned day?
Do they just keep the body?
You have to find out if this funeral home has access to adequate, eco-friendly refrigeration facilities to hold the body safely and respectfully until the ground thaws or the floodwaters recede.
That is so important.
And you also need to know how they communicate and manage the family's emotional expectations when the entire timeline suddenly shifts.
Because that's jarring.
It is. The transparency of the director in answering these what-ifs is the difference between a minor logistical delay and a deeply traumatic, chaotic experience for the family.
It all circles back to vetting. You are looking for a professional who respects the unpredictability of nature and has engineered a safety net around it.
Exactly.
Now, assuming the logistics and the weather hold, we have to look at the practical reality of funding this entire process.
The economics, yes.
Yeah. There's a pervasive, deeply romantic notion out there that because green burials strip away all the manufactured products, returning a body to the earth should be practically free.
I hear that all the time.
I mean, it's just dirt, right? Why would it cost anything?
The source material is very careful to warn families against this cost transparency myth.
So it's a myth.
It is. I mean, it is true that you're eliminating the massive expenses of a bronze casket, chemical embalming fees, and a concrete vault. You're stripping thousands of dollars off the traditional invoice.
Right.
But assuming that makes the final total negligible is a fundamental misunderstanding of what a conservation cemetery actually is.
That was exactly my initial thought. If I'm not buying a $5,000 mahogany box and a $2,000 concrete liner, where's the money going?
Right.
What exactly am I paying for if it's just a hole in the woods?
You are paying for the woods.
Oh, wow.
You must demand a detailed, itemized breakdown of costs because the interment fees at a true conservation ground may actually be quite premium. But that money is not going toward a manufactured product. It's going toward ecological stewardship and legal defense.
Expand on that. Legal defense of the land.
Yes. To guarantee that a forest remains a forest in perpetuity, it requires intense management. It requires funding botanists to remove invasive species.
Right, maintaining the ecosystem.
It requires ecologists to monitor the soil health and water tables. And crucially, it requires establishing a robust, legally ironclad land trust.
Ah, so it can't be sold.
Exactly. The fees you pay for a green burial plot go into an endowment that legally defends that land from corporate developers, logging companies, or municipal seizures long after you're gone.
That is incredible.
You are funding the ongoing permanent life of that ecosystem.
That is a brilliant reframing. You are shifting your financial investment from buying a permanent static object, like a heavy casket, to funding a permanent living landscape. It makes total sense, but it highlights exactly why you have to ask for the itemized pricing.
You really do.
Because you need to verify that your money is actually flowing into land conservation and not just lining the pockets of a traditional cemetery that decided to designate a small, unkempt patch of grass in the back corner as their green section to capitalize on a trend.
Which brings up the absolute necessity of credentials. How do you, as a consumer, verify that the cemetery is actually doing the conservation work they claim to be doing?
Right.
The text strongly advises families to look for independent environmental certifications, specifically highlighting organizations like the Green Burial Council.
Is a certification like that just a marketing sticker they put on their website, or does it carry actual weight? Like, what does the Green Burial Council actually measure?
It carries massive weight, and it is the ultimate shortcut for families seeking transparency. Organizations like the Green Burial Council do not hand out certifications lightly.
They audit them.
They conduct rigorous audits. For a cemetery to earn their highest certification, they must prove they are legally bound to a conservation easement.
Okay.
They must prove they ban all toxic chemicals. They must prove their burial density allows for the health of the native ecosystem.
Wow, so it's thorough.
Very. They even audit the funeral homes to ensure they offer adequate refrigeration, sustainable casket sourcing, and fair, transparent pricing.
So if a family is overwhelmed, looking for that certification essentially means a team of environmental and legal experts has already done the heavy lifting of interrogating the facility.
Exactly. It indicates strict adherence to best practices.
You should always ask the director if their facility or the cemetery they're guiding you toward holds these specific audited affiliations.
It removes the burden of becoming an overnight expert in land trusts and biodegradable glues.
So if the economics are settled, the land is protected, and the vessel is chosen, we arrive at the deeply human need for memorialization.
A very important step.
Once the burial is complete, how do we honor the person's life and mark their legacy without leaving a permanent, unnatural scar on the landscape we just paid to protect?
The physical shift in memorialization is perhaps the most visibly striking difference you'll notice in a green cemetery. The source makes it abundantly clear. Elaborate, polished stone monuments are entirely incompatible with this ethos.
Right. You aren't going to see massive granite obelisks or towering marble angels.
No. The extraction, polishing, and transport of heavy stone monuments carry a massive carbon footprint, and they disrupt the natural visual flow of a conservation forest.
So what do you do instead?
Families must embrace natural markers. We are talking about establishing a new native tree over the grave, planting indigenous shrubs, or using unpolished, locally sourced field stones that lie flat against the earth.
That sounds beautiful.
It is. Some sites allow very simple, small metal plaques, but many prefer the landscape to remain completely untouched visually.
But if it's visually untouched, how do you find your loved one 20 years later when the forest has grown over the site? The guide mentioned GPS mapping.
Yes, it is a fascinating intersection of nature and modern technology. Many conservation cemeteries use highly precise, military-grade GPS mapping to record the exact longitude and latitude of every burial.
Oh, that makes sense.
They might also utilize designated communal memorial areas at the entrance of the preserve, where names are recorded collectively on a central structure rather than individually at each gravesite.
Let's just pause to appreciate the profound philosophical shift in how we view legacy here.
It's massive.
For thousands of years, the core human impulse regarding death has been to carve a name deeply into the hardest stone we can find.
Right to be remembered.
It's an act of defiance. We are standing against the elements, against the erosion of time, essentially screaming into the void, "I was here and I will not be erased by nature."
A very human reaction.
But with a green burial, using a GPS coordinate to find a specific, thriving native oak tree, you are fundamentally accepting that your physical marker will be absorbed by the earth.
Yes.
You're using an invisible satellite tether to find a piece of thriving life that was literally nourished by your loved one's return to the soil. You are choosing to feed the ecosystem rather than paving over it. It is a surrender rather than a defiance.
A profound surrender to the natural order. And that ethos of sustainability must extend beyond the gravesite to the ceremony itself.
Right.
The source material places a heavy emphasis on sustainable stationery and documentation, frequently highlighting a resource called the funeral program site.
Yes, I noticed that, because a traditional funeral can generate a staggering amount of paper waste.
So much waste.
You have guest books, thick, glossy cardstock programs, prayer cards. All of it is heavily processed, chemically bleached, and eventually just ends up sitting in a landfill.
Which totally defeats the purpose of a green burial.
Exactly. The guide points out that families should be actively searching for eco-conscious funeral stationery.
And this is where companies like the funeral program site come in. They offer alternatives like biodegradable memorial cards, recycled paper products, and highly customizable templates that allow families to print only exactly what they need, reducing over-ordering and waste.
But the most incredible innovation here is plantable seed paper.
Oh, I love the seed
Just
paper.
think about the life cycle of a standard funeral program. You hold it during the service, you take it home, it sits on your kitchen counter for a week, and then it goes into the trash.
Pretty much every time.
But with seed paper programs, the paper is embedded with native wildflower seeds. You take that program home, you plant it in your backyard garden, you water it, and the memorial program literally grows into a patch of wildflowers.
It's amazing.
It transforms a piece of single-use trash into a living, breathing memory that continues the cycle of life right outside your window.
It's an elegant, deeply symbolic solution. And for those who want to push the sustainability even further and eliminate physical paper entirely, the text notes that digital solutions are becoming increasingly vital.
Like what?
Online memorial pages, distributing digital programs via QR codes at the service, and the use of live streams.
Live streams are huge, not just for convenience, but for the ecological impact.
Absolutely.
Because if we look at the entire carbon footprint of a funeral, the travel emissions of the attendees are often the largest slice of the pie.
Flights add up quickly.
If you have a family scattered across the country, flying 50 people in for a 2-day event generates massive atmospheric carbon. A high-quality digital live stream allows distant relatives to be fully present, to participate in the mourning and honor the deceased without incurring the massive ecological cost of cross-country air travel.
It requires looking at the holistic footprint of the event, which naturally leads us to evaluate the floral footprint, another deeply ingrained tradition that carries hidden ecological costs.
I have to admit, I never really thought about flowers being bad for the environment until I read this section of the source.
Most people don't.
Flowers are the quintessential symbol of nature at a funeral. How can they be problematic?
It's the industrialization of the floral industry. Traditional, elaborate funeral wreaths are often incredibly damaging.
Why?
Well, they're frequently wrapped in single-use plastics. They're structurally supported by non-biodegradable floral foam. You know that green spongy block that holds the stems?
Oh, yeah, the green stuff.
Right. That foam is essentially a phenolic resin, a toxic plastic that crumbles into microplastics and leaches chemicals into the soil or water.
I had no idea that was toxic.
It's awful. Furthermore, the flowers themselves are often grown with heavy pesticides in South America or Africa, and then shipped globally via refrigerated air freight, so they carry an astronomical carbon footprint.
So what is the alternative? Because people need that visual comfort. And what should families ask the director for?
The guide instructs families to explicitly request locally sourced seasonal flowers from organic farms. No plastic wrap, no floral foam, just stems tied with natural twine.
Keep it simple.
Right. Or moving away from cut flowers entirely, using living potted native plants that can decorate the service and then be taken home by the family to be nurtured.
That's a great idea.
Some families even choose to gather natural decor, fallen branches, pine cones, local ferns directly from the environment, creating beautiful, hyper-local arrangements that simply return to the earth without leaving a trace of microplastics behind.
It all comes down to intentionality. You're looking at every single element, the paper, the flowers, the travel, and asking, does this support the earth or does it harm it?
Exactly.
And that intentionality leads us perfectly into our final major discussion area, hands-on healing.
This is such a crucial part of the process.
Because we have spent a lot of time talking about the physical materials, the untreated pine, the soil microbes, the seed paper.
Right, the logistics.
But the most profound, deeply human shift in a green burial is what it actually asks of the family on an emotional, psychological, and visceral physical level.
A green burial, at its core, demands participation. It is not a spectator event.
The source material strongly encourages families to ask the funeral director about hands-on involvement. We're talking about rolling up your sleeves.
Literally.
Family members physically washing and shrouding the body. Family members bearing the weight of the casket themselves. And most intensely, standing at the edge of the grave, grabbing a shovel and physically working together to fill the earth back in over the vessel.
If we examine this through the lens of the psychology of grief, this physical participation is incredibly significant.
How so?
Over the last century, modern industrialized society has almost entirely outsourced death.
We really have.
When someone dies, we immediately hand their body over to professionals who whisk them away behind closed doors.
Yeah.
We don't see them again until they're presented to us in a funeral parlor, embalmed, cosmetically altered, and placed in a highly stylized, almost theatrical setting.
It's very disconnected.
Exactly. We have built a sterile, professional wall around the reality of mortality. We are shielded from it.
And the text, along with many grief psychologists, argues that this extreme shielding, the sanitization of death, might actually be crippling our ability to grieve properly.
I believe that entirely.
By treating a dead body like a biohazard that must be hidden away, we sever our connection to the reality of what has happened.
Exactly. The cognitive realization of death is not enough. The body needs a somatic, physical
The
realization.
body has to feel it.
Yes.
Yeah.
By literally getting our hands dirty, by feeling the dense, undeniable weight of the body as you carry it, by hearing the stark, heavy sound of the earth hitting the wicker casket, by performing the exhausting physical labor of shoveling dirt until your muscles ache, families are forcefully reconnected with the natural cycle of life.
It confronts the reality head on.
It confronts the sheer physical reality of death in a way that is undeniably raw, intense, and unfiltered. But according to the vast majority of people who experience it, it is also deeply healing, grounding, and profoundly cathartic.
It takes the concept of a funeral away from being a consumer transaction and turns it back into a community act of labor and love.
Exactly.
But we have to acknowledge that doing that, lifting a shovel and burying a loved one, is going to be incredibly unfamiliar and potentially terrifying for people raised in the modern system.
Oh, it can be very intimidating.
Which is why the cultural adaptability and the emotional support of the director are so critical.
Green burials are not a monolith,
Right?
and they aren't just for a specific subculture of environmentalists.
Right.
The source is clear that families must ask directors how they can weave their specific religious, cultural, or spiritual traditions into this ecological framework.
Because many traditions already align with this.
Yes. Whether that involves the specific timing of the burial mandated by certain faiths, specific ritual washings, or traditional readings, the green framework is surprisingly adaptable.
Yeah.
But it requires a director who is culturally fluent, sensitive, and deeply collaborative.
And it requires the director to step beyond logistics and act almost as a frontline grief counselor.
They wear many hats.
The text notes that because this process is so hands-on, and because the emotions it unearths are so visceral, the family requires a safety net. You have to ask the director about their grief support resources, their network of counseling referrals, and their structured aftercare programs. The director's emotional intelligence and ability to hold space for raw grief isn't just a nice bonus. It's a paramount foundational part of the service they're providing.
It's a holistic approach to end-of-life care. They are guiding the family not just through the bureaucratic maze of zoning laws and transportation permits, but through a very intense, uncharted emotional landscape.
And a crucial part of navigating that emotional landscape is the art of storytelling.
Yes.
The text talks about the importance of incorporating readings, music, and symbolic gestures that authentically reflect the life and values of the deceased. But what I found most inspiring is how it connects the individual story to the broader concept of sustainability.
Right. It's about expanding the narrative.
How does the guide suggest doing that?
The guide suggests that families explore ways to connect the memorial service to broader environmental stewardship. This might mean asking attendees to donate to specific environmental causes in lieu of flowers, organizing a community tree planting event, or simply framing the eulogy around the individual's connection to the earth.
I love that.
It gives the raw pain of grief a sense of forward momentum and purpose. The loss of the individual is reframed as a catalyst for supporting the ongoing, resilient life of the planet.
It turns a painful loss into an enduring legacy. It's an incredibly powerful way to process grief.
It really is.
Okay, well, let's pull all of these disparate threads together and synthesize the journey we've just mapped out.
Sounds good.
Planning a green burial is clearly not just an alternative financial transaction. It's not just swapping out a metal box for a wicker one and calling it a day.
Not at all.
It is a profound, highly intentional, and active process. It is the delicate art of balancing your deep human emotional needs to honor a loved one with an unwavering, practical commitment to ecological responsibility.
That's the core of it.
It requires you to be an advocate. From aggressively vetting your funeral director to ensure they have actual proven experience, to demanding chemical-free preservation and understanding the biological necessity of keeping formaldehyde out of the soil.
Exactly.
It requires sourcing truly biodegradable vessels that invite the earth in rather than locking it out. It requires navigating the complex municipal bureaucracy of transportation and zoning laws and completely reimagining what a cemetery even looks like.
Trading the flat lawns for the wild forest.
Trading the flat, manicured lawns and concrete vaults for the wild, dynamic settling of a conservation forest. By asking the exact right questions, the hard, specific questions outlined in this guide, you take what is traditionally a daunting, depressing consumer task and elevate it into a beautiful, collaborative final act of care for the planet.
Well said.
And to you, the listener, whether you are decades away from needing this information and simply exploring the philosophy of it, or if it's a reality you are quietly confronting right now, we urge you to think deeply about what kind of physical and ecological legacy you want to leave behind.
It's worth considering.
Keep the insights, the questions, and the philosophy from this deep dive in your back pocket. They are your blueprint for ensuring that your final footprint on this earth aligns exactly with your values.
And if I may leave you with one final, broader implication to mull over.
Please do.
It is something that isn't explicitly spelled out line by line in the manual, but it is the inevitable, incredibly powerful, logical conclusion of everything we've explored today regarding land trusts and conservation.
I'm intrigued.
We talk about how in certified conservation burial grounds, the premium fees you pay go directly toward ecological stewardship and legal land preservation.
All right.
I want you to think about the immense legal weight of that action. By actively choosing a green burial in a certified conservation area, you are legally binding that specific tract of land as a registered cemetery.
Oh, wow.
Under the vast majority of local and federal laws, recognized cemetery land is fiercely protected. It is practically untouchable.
Right, because of zoning laws.
It cannot be bought out for commercial real estate development. It cannot be clear-cut by logging companies. It cannot be bulldozed to build a shopping mall or a highway.
That is profound.
Therefore, by the simple act of placing your physical body in that earth, you personally become a permanent, legally recognized guardian of that wilderness.
Amazing.
Your very presence creates an invisible legal shield over the forest canopy and the soil below. In this way, your death ceases to be just an ending. It becomes your final and perhaps your most enduring and powerful act of environmental activism.
Wow. Your very return to the earth is the mechanism that protects the earth from destruction.
That's exactly it.
That completely reframes the entire picture of mortality. You aren't just passively resting in a wild nature reserve. Your physical body is the legal reason it gets to remain wild.
It's an incredible legacy.
You finally escape the manicured artificial golf course for good, and you ensure no one can ever build one over you.
Perfectly stated.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.